I walked into my late father-in-law's boathouse on a Tuesday morning to check on the engine before winter, and there was a stranger's fishing rod leaning against the wall where my own has hung for 30 years, and a folding sign on the dock that read, "Welcome to Sawyer's Landing check-in after 3 p.m. My name is Frank Delacroix. I'm 63 years old, a retired boilermaker from Erie, Pennsylvania, married to a woman named Ruth for 38 years, who has forgotten more about running a household than I will ever learn about running anything. I want to tell you this story the way it actually happened, not the way I wish it had happened, because I don't come out of this looking like a hero. I come out of it looking like a man who spent 3 decades handing his son a life raft every single time the water got a little cold, and then acted shocked when that son forgot how to swim. Let me back up, because the details matter, all of them. The boathouse sits on Presque Isle Bay, on a strip of land my wife's father, a man named Harold Sawyer, bought in 1971 with money he saved working the docks for 18 years. Harold wasn't my father, but he loved me like one from the day I married his daughter. And when he died in 2003, he left the boathouse to Ruth and me outright, no strings, because he said, and I remember this exactly, "You two are the only people in this family who've ever finished what you started." I didn't understand what he meant back then. I understand it now, and it costs me something every time I think about it. We used that boathouse maybe 8 or 9 weekends a year. Ruth would putter around with her herb garden out back. I'd tinker with the old Chris-Craft Harold left us, and our son Dale would come up sometimes with his kids before things got complicated. That's a soft word, complicated. Let me use the honest one. Before things got expensive. Dale is 34. He's sharp, funny at parties, the kind of guy who can talk his way into a table at a restaurant that's supposedly full. He got into commercial real estate right out of college, and for a few good years he was doing exactly what he told everyone he was doing. Then 2023 happened to his industry, the way a hard freeze happens to a garden that isn't ready for it, and his commissions dried up almost overnight. But nothing about how he lived dried up with them. Not the leased Range Rover. Not the private swim lessons for his daughters. Not the dues at a golf club I couldn't have afforded on my best year at the plant. And instead of calling me, instead of sitting across from me at my own kitchen table and saying 6 honest words, "Dad, I'm in over my head," my son found a quieter way through it. A boathouse his parents used maybe once a month. A key he'd had copied years ago for emergencies that never came. His late grandfather's dock, photographed at sunrise, uploaded to a website with a name that made it sound like it belonged to somebody else entirely. 11 months. 162 reviews. I found out those numbers the same week I found out everything else, and I'll tell you how in a minute, but first I have to tell you what I did to make this possible, because if I let myself be only the victim in this story, I'd be lying to you, and I promised myself on that dock I wouldn't lie anymore, not even the comfortable kind. For as long as Dale has been an adult, I have been the man who makes his problems disappear before they can teach him a single thing. When he was 26 and his first business fell apart, a food truck venture with a partner who skipped town with the trailer, I didn't sit him down and make him call a lawyer or eat the loss like a grown man. I wrote a check for $11,000 at my own kitchen counter in under 2 minutes, because watching his shoulders drop with relief felt better to me than a paycheck ever did. His relief was my medicine, and I kept refilling that prescription for years without ever asking what it was actually treating. When the down payment on his house came up short by $32,000, I wired it over and called it an early piece of his inheritance, specifically so he wouldn't have to feel the weight of it. When he'd introduce me to clients at some dinner and wave vaguely toward the lake and mention our family's place on the water, I'd smile and say nothing, because correcting him in front of strangers felt cruel, felt small. One time, at his own birthday dinner, a man across the table said, "Must be nice, having a family compound like that." And Dale just said, "It really is," 2 words, while I sat 4 feet away and said absolutely nothing. I told myself silence was kindness. I recited that lie to myself so many times I never believed it had scripture behind it. I'm helping him. That's the sentence I told myself every single time, and not once, not one single time in over a decade did I ask myself the only question that actually mattered. Helping him become what? If you're a parent listening to me right now, whatever your relationship is to the son or daughter or grandchild you keep rescuing, I want you to actually sit with that question instead of scrolling past it. Because I don't think the mistake most of us make is loving our kids too much. I don't believe there's such a thing. I think the mistake is rescuing so fast, so completely, so quietly that they never get the chance to learn the one fact every adult eventually has to learn on their own, which is that they can survive the cold water without their father standing there with a towel already warm. That Tuesday morning, I drove home with both hands on the wheel like a kid taking his road test, because I genuinely didn't trust myself behind it. That night I told Ruth everything at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd once budgeted our whole first year of marriage on the back of a church bulletin. She listened all the way through without saying one word, which is one of maybe 40 superpowers that woman has. Then she got up, made 2 cups of tea, neither of us drank, sat back down, and said the sentence that rearranged the rest of my life. Frank, we didn't raise a con man, we raised a boy who never once had to tell us the truth, and then we wondered why he never learned how. 38 years married to that woman, and she can still take the wind clean out of me without raising her voice. We sat at that table until almost 2 in the morning and agreed on 2 things. First, no yelling, no public scene, no humiliating our son in front of the whole family. And second, no more disappearing consequences. Not one more. Whatever came next, Dale was going to be the first man in 3 generations of this family to meet the actual, undiscounted cost of his own decisions. You would not believe what that second promise cost me to say out loud. It felt like putting down a bag of stones I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it had weight. I called Dale the next evening. I stood out in the backyard so I could pace while I talked, and Ruth watched me through the kitchen window with her arms folded. I kept my voice level, flat as a carpenter's line, and I said, "The guests at Sawyer's Landing left a review about the dock light flickering. Should I fix that, or is that the host's responsibility?" The silence on the other end of that phone lasted so long I actually checked to see if the call had dropped. Then it all came out, and I want to walk you through it stage by stage, because if you've ever confronted somebody who just got caught, you'll recognize this sequence like a song you didn't know you'd memorized. First came the minimizing. "Dad, come on, it's not what it looks like." Then came entitlement, dressed up as logic. "You guys use that place, what, once a month? It was just sitting there." I was making an asset actually work for once. Then came the future, used as an alibi. It's going to be mine eventually anyway. I was basically just managing my own inheritance a little early. And when none of that landed anywhere soft, the blame swung all the way around like a gate in the wind. "You know what, Dad? If you'd ever treated me like an actual partner, instead of a kid who still needs an allowance, maybe I wouldn't have had to do it this way." Had to. I actually pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at it for a second, like the words might look different than they sounded. I had 30 years of things I'd never said stacked up like cordwood behind my teeth, every log of it dry and ready to burn. Instead, I asked him one question, quiet as reading a water meter. "How much, Dale?" Another silence, longer than the first. Then a number, spoken so softly I almost asked him to repeat it, and then softer still, the sentence that changed the temperature of the entire conversation. "It's gone, Dad, all of it, faster than I want to admit." We were drowning, and I didn't know how to say it out loud. There it was. Not greed exactly, not malice, drowning. My son had been drowning for close to 2 years, right in front of me, at every Sunday dinner, every birthday, every Christmas Eve. And he was so afraid of looking like a failure standing next to a father who worked a union job his whole life and never once asked anybody for a dime, that he'd rather quietly rent out his grandfather's dock to strangers than say one 4-letter word, "Help." I'm not excusing what he did. I need you to hear that clearly. I'm telling you that once I finally understood the shape of it, understanding it hurt worse than the theft itself, because the theft was his, but the fear underneath it, I'd built that with my own 2 hands, one rescue at a time, the same way Harold built that boathouse plank by plank. That week I did 3 things I had never done in 34 years of being Dale's father. First, I called the rental site directly. It took 2 days, a copy of the deed, a scan of my license, and one deeply uncomfortable phone call with a young man named Marcus, who kept apologizing like he'd personally rented the place out himself. The listing came down on a Thursday afternoon. 162 reviews gone. I confess I read every single one first, at 1 in the morning, at my own kitchen table, like a man reading letters that were never meant for him. A couple from Cleveland wrote that they'd gotten engaged on that dock. A woman said it was the first vacation she'd taken alone since her divorce, and that watching the sunrise over the water healed something she didn't know was still broken. Strangers had been mended by Harold Sawyer's dock, and Harold never got a dime of credit, and my son had cashed every check. Second, I had the locks changed, boathouse, and shed both, and I stood there in the cold while the locksmith worked, a heavy-set guy named Pete, who talked about his daughter's softball team the entire time. When he handed me 2 new keys on a plain steel ring, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not victory, grief. I was locking a door inside my own chest, and I knew it while I was doing it, and I did it anyway, because Ruth's voice was in my head saying no more disappearing consequences, not one more. Third, I made an appointment with a woman named Carol Whitfield, the attorney who'd handled Harold's estate years before, because Ruth and I had a living trust drawn up back when Dale was still a boy who cannonballed off that dock every single summer, and that trust left everything, house, savings, the boathouse, all of it, to him. It had seemed like the obvious, loving thing to do at the time. Most dangerous ideas do. I want to be very clear about what happened in Carol's office that Thursday, because this is the part of stories like mine that people love to get wrong, and the comment section always proves it. We did not cut our son out. Revenge was never on the table, not for 1 second. Carol has known me almost 20 years, and before we opened a single folder, she looked at me over her glasses and asked me straight out, "Frank, are you doing this out of anger?" And I gave her the honest answer. "Carol, if I were angry, this would take 20 minutes. What I need is going to take longer than that." What we built took just over 3 hours and 2 pots of coffee. The accounts went into what Carol called an incentive trust, though Ruth immediately renamed it the matching fund, and that's what we still call it to this day. From now on, our money would match Dale's money, dollar for dollar. His earned income, his documented savings, his contributions to his own daughter's college funds. Our estate would double whatever he actually built with his own 2 hands. It would fund nothing else. Not the lease payments, not the golf dues, not the appearance of a life he could no longer afford. If my son built something real, we would help him build it twice as tall. If he built nothing, the money would sit there, patient as Harold's old cigar box of receipts, waiting for him to start. Money as a mirror, instead of money as a costume. It took me 63 years and 1 stranger's fishing rod leaning against my own boathouse wall to finally understand the difference. I hope it takes you less time than it took me. And the boathouse itself came out of the trust entirely, and what we did with it instead was Ruth's idea, and it is, without question, the best thing in this entire story. My wife has spent the last 6 years volunteering at a hospice center on the east side of town, sitting with families in their last hard weeks with somebody they love. Families who haven't left a waiting room in days, who flinch every time a phone rings at the wrong hour. She came to bed the night before our appointment with Carol, put her cold feet against my legs the way she's done since Nixon was in office, and said, "Frank, what if Daddy's doc had a job to do?" So now it does. 6 weeks every summer, Sawyer's Landing goes completely free to hospice families for a weekend away from hospital smell and hallway whispers. A dock, a fire pit, loons calling at dusk. A place where nobody has to whisper and nobody has to perform being fine. When we signed that page in Carol's office, Ruth cried for the first time through this entire ordeal, and then she laughed right through the tears and said, "My father just approved this from wherever he is." I felt the whole room agree. I believe her. I felt it too. Now, Saturday, the driveway. The scene I've replayed more times than my own wedding day, and I'm going to slow it all the way down, because it deserves that, and so do you. I got there early, maybe 7 in the morning, that hard, bright cold that makes the whole world look like it's taken its makeup off for once. I set 2 sawhorses up near the water, climbed up, and took down the Sawyer's Landing placard my son had paid some online shop to laser cut. In the shed, wrapped carefully in a moving blanket behind the old canoe, I found the original sign, hand-painted by Harold himself in 1971, Harold's Landing in faded blue letters. The paint cracked, but the wood still solid underneath. Dale hadn't thrown it away. He'd hidden it. Make of that whatever you want to make of it. I've made about a dozen different things of it myself. I was sanding the edges of that sign when I heard his truck on the gravel. He got out slowly, and the first thing I noticed, with an ache under my ribs I wasn't ready for, was that he looked exactly like Harold used to look at the end of a long week. Same set to the jaw, gray starting in at his temples now. He walked to the edge of the dock and stopped. He didn't come any closer. The water slapped against the pilings. Somewhere out over the bay, a gull was making its opinions known to nobody in particular. For a full minute, maybe more, the only sound in the world was sandpaper, water, and that bird. He spoke first. You changed the locks. I did. He looked at the sawhorses, and I watched him understand exactly what was sitting on them, watched that understanding move through him like current through wire. You're putting the old sign back. I'm putting the right name back, I said. And then I watched my son's face do something I will spend the rest of my life trying to describe correctly. The anger came first, right on schedule, jaw tightening, breath gathering for whatever counterattack he'd rehearsed the whole drive over. And it reached around for something to grab onto, some unfairness, some loophole, some had to, and it found absolutely nothing, because there was nothing there. There was just his grandfather's sign, and his father's hands sanding it, and the water where he'd learned to swim, sitting right there in that honest morning light. And I watched the anger fold in on itself, floor by floor, into whatever had been holding it up the whole time. His shoulders dropped a couple of inches. When he finally spoke again, his voice cracked on the very first word. Do you have any idea what it's like being your son? I set the sandpaper down. Ruth, up on the porch with 2 cups of coffee she'd poured and never brought down, went completely still. And he said it all right there in the gravel. And I made myself stand there and take every word of it without flinching, because I understood, somehow, that this was the first fully honest thing my son had said out loud in years, and if I interrupted him, it might never come again. He told me he'd spent his whole life hearing what a steady, reliable man his father was. That at my retirement dinner, 20 men stood up, one after another, telling stories about me covering somebody's rent, wiring a neighbor's garage for free, picking up a coworker's tab when his wife got sick. And he sat at the back table doing math in his head, realizing he didn't own one single thing outright that hadn't been handed to him first. He said when the real estate market gutted his income, he lay awake at night doing a different kind of math. And the thought of sitting across from me and saying I'm failing felt, and this is his phrase, not mine, like signing my own eviction notice from this family. So he found a way to keep the costume on a little longer. I told myself I was just borrowing from my own future, he said. Then he looked at the sign on the sawhorses, and his chin went, and he said the thing that finally broke me clean through. But it wasn't my future I was selling, Dad. It was your past. I know that now, and I can't sit with it. Nobody tells you this part about being a father, so I will. The sacrifices never feel like the hard part. Honestly, they feel good, that's half the trap of it. The hard part is the moment your child hands you the whole ugly truth, shaking, and you have to hold it without softening it. Because softening it, sanding its corners round the way I'd been sanding corners for 30 years, is exactly what put us both standing in that gravel to begin with. I came down off the porch and stood in front of my son, close, the way Harold used to stand when something actually mattered. And I said, Dale, I owe you an apology, and you owe me $41,000, and both of those things are true at the exact same time, and neither one cancels out the other. He laughed, one broken syllable that was really a sob wearing a disguise, and pressed the heel of his hand into his eyes. I told him everything right there, no lawyer's letter in the mail, no ambush, the trust, the matching fund, what it would and would never again pay for, the new locks, the hospice families, 6 weeks every summer, and I watched that last part land on him differently than everything else had. He looked out at the water for a long time, and something in his face rearranged itself. I told him the boathouse would never be his outright, and then, because consequences without reasons are just cruelty, wearing paperwork, I told him why. Your grandfather built this with 18 years of dock wages, I said. It was never an asset, son. It was a lesson, and you were charging strangers admission to a lesson you never actually learned. He was quiet a long time. The gull finally left. The coffee up on the porch had gone cold. And then my son asked the only question in the English language that could have started us walking back toward each other. How do I fix it, Dad? Not can it be fixed. Not what happens now. How do I... 63 years old, and I'm telling you that single question was the finest gift my son has ever given me, grandchildren included, and I will deny saying that at every holiday dinner for the rest of my life. Here's what fixing it actually looked like, and I'll warn you now, none of it makes for a great movie. Real repair never does. It looks like paperwork and ordinary Tuesdays. He turned in the leased Range Rover, ate the penalty, and bought a used pickup with 200,000 miles on it, and a check engine light that 4 mechanics haven't been able to explain. He and his wife Kayla sat down together with an actual written budget for the first time in 9 years of marriage, and I'll tell you plainly, those first few months nearly ended them. Kayla had married a costume too, and she had her own long look in the mirror to survive. She came to see Ruth alone one afternoon, no makeup, no appointment, and said, "I kept telling him we deserved the life we had. I never once asked him what it cost him to keep faking it. I wasn't in the room, but Ruth tells me they cried through most of 2 cups of coffee, and that Kayla washed every dish in the sink before she left, which in my wife's private accounting system is roughly equivalent to a signed confession. They pulled their girls out of private swim club and into the community pool program instead, and for the record, the girls were completely fine within about a week. Kids usually are. It's the parents who mourn the logo on the towel. Dale left commercial real estate entirely and took a straight salary job at a credit union of all places, running their first-time homebuyer counseling program, sitting across a desk all day from nervous young couples, telling them the plain truth about what they can actually afford, talking them gently out of the exact kind of overreach that nearly drowned him. He told me one Sunday in my garage that it's the first job he's ever had where he doesn't feel like he's performing. "Turns out I'm good at telling people the truth," he said, and then he laughed at himself before I could, which is new, and which I love watching in him. And every month, on the 1st, my son drives to our house with an envelope, $600, earned in cash, because I told him at that dock, and I meant it, that I wanted him to feel the actual physical weight of it leaving his hands every single month. The way Harold felt every dollar going into that old coffee tin behind his workbench. The envelopes don't come to me. Not 1 cent of it is mine to keep. Every single envelope goes straight into the fund that sends hospice families up to that dock. My son is paying back the strangers he once rented his grandfather's water to by buying quiet mornings for people who are genuinely running out of time. At his current pace, it'll take him a little over 5 years. He knows exactly how long, because he did the math himself, out loud, at my kitchen table, and when he finished, he just nodded like a man reading a fair sentence handed down by a judge he respected. Guilt gets tired. Guilt is a sprinter, all noise and tears and promises, and then it needs a long nap. Consistency is the one that actually finishes the race. If you want to know whether somebody in your life has genuinely changed, don't listen to the apology, no matter how beautiful it sounds. Count the envelopes. Whatever your family's envelopes happen to be, count them. Last month, the first hospice family came up to the water. A woman named Renata and her husband Sal, married 41 years, Sal's second to last good month, the doctors figured. Dale asked if he could go up the day before to get everything ready, and he spent the whole afternoon fixing the dock ladder and untangling 2 old fishing lines and hiding a little tin of lucky pennies under a loose plank because, he said, everybody needs something to find. Sunday evening, Renata sent Ruth a photo of Sal sitting on the end of Harold's dock at golden hour with a fishing rod in his hands and the widest grin on his face. And Dale stood in our kitchen looking at that photo for a long time and finally said, mostly to himself, 162 reviews, and I never once felt anything close to this. That's the whole sermon right there, if you want it in 1 sentence. A few weeks ago, my son asked if he could take his own girls up to the water for a weekend. He asked me, out loud, for permission to visit the place he once listed online under a name that wasn't ours. If you think that humbled him, you've missed the entire point of this story. He stood taller asking than he ever stood while pretending. I said yes, on one condition, and handed him a can of marine varnish and his grandfather's old paintbrush, cleaned and wrapped in a rag in my garage for 23 years. That Sunday, my son repainted Harold's Landing back above the boathouse door with his own 2 hands, straight lines, steady grip, while his daughters held the ladder and argued the whole time about who was holding it better. I stood in the yard with Ruth's hand in mine, watching my boy up on that ladder in that clean morning light, and I swear to you, on every pipe I ever welded straight, I heard Harold's voice come right off the water. "Check your seams, son." And I said it back to myself. "They're finally sealed, Harold. Took him 34 years, but they're finally sealed." So what did all of this actually teach me? 3 things, and then I'll let you get back to your day. First, generosity without honesty isn't love. It's a sedative. I kept my son comfortable for 30 years, and comfort taught him nothing except how to need more of it, quieter and quieter, until the needing went completely underground where I couldn't see it anymore. Second, the opposite of enabling is not punishment, and don't let anybody in your family sell you that lie. The opposite of enabling is structure. We didn't take Dale's future away from him. We bolted it to his own 2 hands, and that turned out to be the most generous thing we've ever done for him, more generous than every single check I ever wrote at that kitchen counter. And third, this is the one I'd tattoo on myself somewhere if Ruth would let me. People don't change because they got caught. Getting caught just makes them better at hiding the next time. People change when the truth finally costs less than keeping up the performance. Our whole job, as the people who love them, is to stop paying for the performance ourselves. Here's what I'd ask you to actually do today, not someday. If there's an arrangement in your family that everybody just quietly understands, a house, a boat, a business, a someday it's all yours anyway hanging over every holiday dinner, have the uncomfortable 5-minute conversation and make it explicit. Say what's borrowed. Say what's given outright. Say what has to be earned and exactly what earning it looks like. Write it down if you have to. Vague generosity is the soil entitlement grows in, and I let mine grow for 3 decades because the conversation felt rude. The conversation isn't rude, it's a mercy. Silence is the cruelty, every time. And here's the question I'd ask you to sit with tonight. The same one I sat with on the end of my father-in-law's dock in October, my whole life quietly rearranging itself behind me. Is there somebody you keep rescuing because deep down, you're afraid of who you'd become to them if you finally stopped? Now, I want to hear from you, and I mean that honestly. Tell me, as a father, mother, brother, sister, grandparent, whoever you are to the person you're thinking of right now, did I get this right? Would you have done the matching fund, or would you have handled it differently? Tell me where you're listening from tonight, because it still stops me cold that a retired boilermaker from Erie can end up in the same hour on somebody's phone in Tampa and somebody else's kitchen radio in Manila. If you've ever been the parent who finally stopped rescuing, or the son or daughter who had to hand the costume back, I'd be honored if you'd share even a small piece of it below. Somebody out there tonight has an envelope of their own to deliver, and they need to know they're not the only one carrying it. Take care of the people who belong to you. Tell them the truth, even when it costs you something, and check your seams.